So we've got a single family home up in Fox Point, 515 West Dean Court. It was on the market for 34 days. I think this is coming back to the market though. It's a 5-bed, 3.5 bath, 2.5 car garage, about just shy of 2,400 square feet above grade. The asking price or the list price is $549,900. As I mentioned, it's been on the market for about a month. So if we just take a quick look at some of the things that are important to us to be mindful of, we're looking at, inclusions. There's a cooktop, oven, fridge, disposable dishwasher, microwave, washer, dryer. It's on municipal water and municipal sewer. And the Fox Point municipality is considered a village. So we've got that right here. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time just talking about the remarks here. Like what I'd like to focus on are the private remarks. Offers to be presented as received. Seller's ideal closing scenario is ASAP. Square footage and room size is not verified by agent or broker. And they are encouraging that earnest money be sent via trust funds. So all in all, like a pretty standard listing, but one thing that I wanted to make sure everyone saw was this. Sellers offers concessions, yes. So you can find that here in the middle towards the bottom, or you can also see it up here. If the seller is in fact offering concessions, they will have indicated such within MLS. Now, again, there is a difference between a concession and an offer of compensation. We are no longer able to put the offer of compensation into MLS like we used to prior to August 15th. But if a seller is offering concessions, so think of concessions as like a credit or a pool of dollars that the buyer has the opportunity to use in whatever way, shape, or form they choose. Concessions can be advertised within MLS. So that's just the listing here in a nutshell. I'm going to go over to the offer document, our practice document, and let's go through kind of our scenario. So I've just listed here the address, and per MLS, I put the inclusions that were already listed and then the exclusion. So just a little bit of copying, pasting, nothing to call out here. Same thing for the seller preferences, since we just talked about those. They were interested in closing fast. They want electronic earnest money as it pertains to method of delivery, so that would be trust funds. But let's get into our buyer profile. And today we are helping Ben and Jen Lopez, even though they're not around anymore, looking for a move up house. So they need some more space for their growing family. They've got a flexible closing time frame. They do want to have a home inspection and a radon inspection. And then in terms of the cash that they have on hand for things like earnest money, maybe an appraisal gap, they're looking for you to help them understand how best can that amount of cash be leveraged and used in our offer. And then they're pre-approved for up to $575,000 with a local lender. So their pre-approval limit of 575 is, within the list price range of 549.9. And in terms of a down payment, they've got 20% down to make. So for our offer practice, we're going to make some assumptions, okay, just to help make things easy. The buyers have actually signed a buyer agency back on August 1st. That's valid for 90 days. And they agreed to pay you, their buyer's agent, 2.4% of the purchase price as it pertains to compensation. Now, this is something that you guys should do regardless of whether or not you are writing an offer or not. It is highly encouraged that you call the listing agent prior to the showing to learn a little bit more about the home, maybe just confirm some of the seller preferences that were stated on MLS, confirm them. Maybe there's some more, maybe there's some changes. It's a great opportunity for you to also ask whether or not there's been showings on the property? Has there been a lot of showings? What's the activity like? Are there any offers in hand? And also too, this is your opportunity to start a good line of communication with the listing agent and ask also about what's happening with concessions. Because as we saw on MLS, if I go back, this seller is offering concessions. So I actually called the listing agent in advance of this offer practice to learn a little bit more about that. So after calling Ross, so Ross Trefford is actually the listing agent on this property. He indicated the seller is in fact offering concessions, and the seller is willing to offer up to 2.4% of the purchase price for a buyer's agent. So I said, that's fantastic to hear. Is there any preferred way you would like to see this in the offer? Might you want it to be included within the offer itself at the very end? There's that new section within the offer document, or in addendum A, there is a section at the top that talks about seller's contributions, which would be also considered a concession. The listing agent indicated he suggests we write it actually into the offer to purchase. So if either one of you were at this morning's new normal conversation, we had Jay Schmidt and I think Mara Kruger, and both were talking about the importance of asking questions in advance, right, to learn a little bit more. And Jay actually said, like, as a listing agent, I want to try to understand what might be easiest for the buyers too, in terms of how do we want to write if compensation is being offered? How do we want to do that? How do we want to manage it? Because every brokerage, as we've seen over the last couple of weeks, everybody's doing things maybe a little bit differently. So let's just keep the lines of communication open and try to make this an offer that works both for the seller and the buyer. So I asked in this instance, what's easiest for the seller? And the listing agent said, please just write the compensation into the offer to purchase. So make it simple. Also for our practice today, we're going to assume that there are no other offers in hand. So we're just going to offer asking price for today's practice. It's not necessarily, competitive offer practice, but this is just the foundational elements of offer writing. So if you're ever in a situation where you are in competition or you need some suggestions or guidance to help make your offer competitive, by all means, pick up the phone, call the helpline. You can call myself, you could call Joan Reed or Steph Kennard, depending on your office. Okay, so I'm going to does anyone have any questions? Nope. Okay.
No.
So I'm going to go right into zip forms and we're going to somebody has a question. Oh, everyone's good. Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to go into zip form and we are going to create a new transaction. It's a new purchase. And we're going to do offer practice 8/28 Dean Court. Again, this isn't zip form practice. We have zip form training on YouTube, some previous training. So if you need a little bit extra help there, by all means, head over to YouTube. If you can't find the practice videos, let me know and I can guide you in the right direction. But we're going to be putting together a residential offer packet, and it's important that you select the right template because that will automatically then put in the correct documents that will help get you started in your transaction. So I'm just going to put in our buyer names. You would also put in their email address because this helps set you up for e-signature through DocuSign, but I'm not going to put in emails today. And then make sure you also update the selling agent to yourself. And you would put your email in as well. Okay.
Kim,
So once we, oh yeah, go ahead.
The zip form because we can't really see.
Oh, you can't see it?
I can't see. I don't know about everybody else.
The only thing that I see is it's like you're clicking around. It's like a Google. There we go.
Can you see
Yep.
this?
Yep,
Yep.
now I can see.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'm gonna go into documents. And I'm just gonna start pulling up our main document, the offer to purchase. So the good old WB 11. So we're drafting this offer on today. So all you have to do is click into the box there within zip forms and select the date. Let's type in our address, 515 West Dean Court. And this is in the blank of Fox Point. Does anyone remember how to find the municipality type? So if I go back to the listing, right here, it's a village. So we put in here the village of Fox Point, county of, this is in Milwaukee County, but you can also confirm that on can you guys still see my MLS screen?
Yes.
Okay, you can always double check your county using MLS. So this is in Milwaukee. So 515 West Dean Court in the village of Fox Point, county of Milwaukee. For today's practice, we're just going to be offering what they're asking, so $549,900. And included in the purchase price, let's go back to MLS and just double check what we've got going on here in terms of inclusions. So here we've got ovens, cooktop, refrigerator, microwave, dishwasher, disposal, washer, dryer, window treatments. I would probably want to confirm the number of ovens versus just saying ovens. And you could do that like once you go through the home and you see it and you see how many we're talking about, or you could always just call the listing agent. So for today, I'm just going to do this ovens. I'm going to we'll just pretend there's 2. And the buyer wants everything else that's already included. So that's easy breezy. And then not included in the purchase price, let's go back to the exclusions. And we've got seller's personal property and staging furniture. Okay. Okay, hold on, I'm just gonna check the chat real quick. Oh, we fixed this. Okay. Moving down, in terms of binding acceptance, this is a question too that you can ask the listing agent when you are on the phone with them prior to the showing, or if your buyers have expressed interest and they're going to be writing an offer, I would also call the listing agent after the showing and just indicate, my buyers are thinking about writing, they're excited about it, just checking to make sure if there's anything as it pertains to a binding acceptance deadline that you want us to be mindful of. Sometimes listing agents will put a deadline or a binding acceptance timeframe within the private remarks of MLS, but that wasn't in here. It just said offers to be presented as received. So let's give the seller until Friday. Now, if you don't put a specific time on Friday, it automatically will go until 11:59 p.m. the day stated on that line number 40. And that's the same holds true for any deadlines within the offer, whatever day, it goes up to 11:59 p.m. that day, unless you change and be very specific. So we could say, you know what, we're only going to give the seller until 8 p.m. on Friday. So let's just do that. Now, the closing, we need to put a closing date, and we know that the sellers want to close as soon as possible. If I go back to my buyer profile, we know that our buyer's time frame is flexible. So let's just say, a typical closing now can be between 30 to 45 days. So I'm going to take a look at my calendar. That's not my calendar. Hold on. And let's see here. Why don't we how about Monday the 30th? It's a full month. It's the end of the month. It's a Monday. That's perfect. This is something too that I might be checking in with the listing agent on after the showing. Again, when you call and you say, my buyers are interested in writing an offer, what's the binding acceptance timeframe? You also might want to say, I know your sellers are looking for a closing timeframe of ASAP. we're thinking about, Monday, September 30th. How does that sound? You know, if the listing agent has feedback on it, and if there's a more specific date that the seller's looking for and your buyer could accommodate that, write that into the offer. But for now, let's just say that Monday, September 30th works. And closing is going to happen at the place selected by the buyer. So we have to make sure we cross off at the place selected by the seller. Okay. Now, something that we always have to make sure moving into the following pages, Zip Forms does not carry the address through to the top of each subsequent page. So just make sure that you add it here to page 2. I'm just going to do a quick check and look, it's already done it to page 3. So that's perfect. Okay. So now we get to earnest money. So we know that our buyers, if I go back to our buyer profile, they have $15,000 in cash. That $15,000, they're looking to you to help them understand, how should I use that $15,000 in my offer? Could we use it for earnest money? Could we use it for an inspection coverage, appraisal gap, etc.? So can anybody tell me what the typical earnest money percentages that buyers in this market are offering in terms of earnest money?
Is it 1 to 2%?
Yeah, it's like 1 to 2, 1 to 3. So let's just say that our buyers here are going to offer 2%. And the higher the earnest money, maybe the more attractive an offer might look to a seller. However, you also need to make sure that as you are talking about earnest money with your buyers, they understand what it is and how it might be dispersed if a offer falls through and doesn't get to closing. So if we do 2% for our earnest money, in this example, 2% of $549,000 is $10,998. So let's round it to an even $11,000. Oops. Okay. And let's say that we'll just make it the 5 days. So upon the offer getting accepted, the buyer will deliver to and it's going to be to the listing firm, $11,000 on earnest money. Now, again, I shouldn't say it's going to be delivered to the listing firm. A couple of things about earnest money. If you aren't sure who is holding the earnest money, again, it's a perfect opportunity for you to connect with the listing agent and ask. Sometimes a listing firm will use a title company to hold the money. And in many of those situations, those instructions are usually included within either private remarks in MLS or maybe an offer guidelines document that's been uploaded into MLS. But again, if you're not sure, it's 110% okay to call the listing agent just to confirm where earnest money will be held. But we also know too that in this instance, our sellers are encouraging people to use trust funds. So trust funds is that electronic method of payment that people can use to transfer over money for earnest money. That is still being held by the listing firm. So even if people are using trust funds, you still get rid of drafting firm or other identified and keep the listing firm. Make sense? And then here again, it's important that you walk through some of these sections of the offer so your buyers understand what happens with the earnest money. And immediately, right, if the offer is accepted, it's deposited within 5 days to that trust account. There's also what happens if negotiations don't result in an accepted offer. So just make sure that you are clearly articulating the various scenarios as it pertains to earnest money. So then the next section here is talking about the condition report. And the law requires that a seller provide a condition report. Now, there might be some instances where a seller refuses to submit one. It might be where a personal representative of a trust is the seller and they haven't lived in the home. So if a seller does refuse to fill out a condition report, there is a separate document that listing agents should be having that seller sign indicating such that they are refusing to fill out the condition report. But let's take a look at ours here. So I go into MLS and, oh, look at this. Seller refusal to complete a condition report. So this is what it looks like, okay? So it indicates seller's name, if they're selling it under an entity or an LLC, and they are. And it says indicates here, seller's refusal to complete. So the seller's acknowledging that they should be filling this out, but they're refusing to do it. So in that instance, we don't really have a condition report date to put in here. Does that make sense? Like we can also indicate like in the additional provisions, like no condition report provided per the seller. But if there was a condition report that was provided, what you need to do is indicate that your buyer is in receipt of the condition report, and you have to put the date of that condition report. So because we don't even have a condition report, there's nothing for us to put in these lines. I'm going to speed past page 3 because it's a bunch of definitions as it pertains to defects. And I'm going to look at there. Can we put a date of the refusal? Boss, what you could just do is acknowledge that the seller has refused to complete a condition report, and we could put that type of language in the additional provisions, and we can also state the date that that was signed. So we'll do that later. Okay. Moving into the inspections. So we know that our buyers do in fact want to have a home inspection. So we're going to indicate that line 193, the inspection contingency, is included in this offer. And again, there is a difference between an inspection and a test. An inspection is a visible review of the property done by a third-party licensed home inspector. A test is where somebody actually takes something from the home and has to do testing on it. So it might be water, soil, air, radon. So if this inspection, the initial inspection, the inspector recommends additional people come in and take a look at specific items like a roof or a basement. This is already included within your offer here. So buyer may have follow-up inspections recommended in a written report resulting from an authorized inspection, provided they occur prior to the deadline. So if you need to have any additional follow-ups, you are covered. But the date that you put in here, the number of days, so the contingency shall be deemed satisfied unless buyer within blank days after acceptance delivers to seller a copy of the written inspection report dated after the date on line 1. So your inspection has to happen after today's date, the date with which the offer is being written. So they deliver the report, and then they deliver a written notice listing the defects identified in those report to which the buyer objects. So what all this means is the number of days that you put in this line 206, means you are going to have the inspection done by then. You will have to have any follow-up inspections that your buyer decides to pursue done by that time. If there are any estimates of work or repair that needs to be done on the property, you have to get all of those gathered up. And you also need to be negotiating how you want the seller, if the seller has the right to cure, you need to be negotiating how repairs, credits, what have you, how are they going to be facilitated and executed. All of that has to happen within the number of days that you put here on line 206. So it's not just the number of days that you have to have the initial home inspection done. Everything has to happen. So this is a really important deadline. It's usually the first deadline that many offers have to achieve besides the earnest money. So this is kind of a very busy time, especially for a buyer's agent, because you are scheduling inspections, you're helping get additional things inspected. You're going to be negotiating. So it's really important that you are ready to roll up your sleeves and get that work done within this time frame. So if you leave this number of days blank, the automatic default is 15 days. When I write an offer and if I'm in competition and we are having a home inspection, I try to make this deadline as tight of a deadline as possible. but that also means the onus is on me to make sure that I am doing my due diligence to get all that stuff done. So for our purposes today, let's just say we're gonna get all this done in 10 days. Now, in terms of the right to cure, so in a seller's market, it is very common for buyers to give the seller the right to cure. So a right to cure might mean a variety of things. If the buyer and seller agree that a roof needs to be repaired, and the buyer proposes that the seller do the repairs prior to closing, that's a way to cure. If that's something that actually does happen, you want to get very specific in an amendment, which would make those repairs official and part of the contract. Another way that a seller might cure is if, we'll use another roof example. Say you have a roofer come in and it's going to cost $10,000 to replace the roof. The buyer might say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we will take on putting on a new roof after closing. We'll take on that responsibility. However, we had the roofer come in, they told us it would cost $10,000. We'd like a closing cost credit of $10,000, or we'd like you to reduce the purchase price $10,000. That's also an opportunity or a method of cure. So I'm just going to go over here, and I'm going to say the seller, in our example, the seller shall have the right to cure. And again, it's really important that from the very beginning, you're always having these open lines of communication with your co-broke, because you want to keep things moving along. You want to keep people in the loop. You don't want to have any surprises. So when it does come time, say you are trying to negotiate repairs or cures, and you just get to a stalemate, and you tried to get amendments signed and both parties just cannot agree to how things are going to get fixed. The seller, or say you can't come to an agreement. The buyer, per our offer, has the opportunity to deliver a notice to the seller indicating the defects. And I'm going to go back up here because this is actually outlined here. This contingency shall be deemed satisfied unless buyer within 10 days after acceptance delivers to seller a copy of the written inspection report dated after the date on line 1 and a written notice listing the defects identified. So again, a contingency can be deemed satisfied if an amendment detailing any changes to the offer has been signed by both parties. But if you cannot come to a mutual agreement, the buyer then has the opportunity to send the inspection report along with a notice of defects and then listing the defects that the buyer objects to. Now, if the seller has the right to cure, the seller then can satisfy the contingency by delivering written notice to the buyer within blank days after the buyer sends that notice of defects, stating the seller is going to cure the defects. The seller could also satisfy the contingency by curing the defects or delivering up to the buyer a written report detailing the work that's going to be done no later than 3 days prior to closing. So when I have a home inspection, and again, I'm talking with the buyer or the listing agent, and we are trying to negotiate things, if we get to the point where we're at a stalemate and we can't come to an agreement and the buyer decides to deliver a notice indicating the list of defects, I do not leave this line blank, giving the seller 10 days to figure out what they're going to do. I usually give it like 2 to 3 days because there shouldn't be any surprises. So the seller should be ready to go and make a decision as to what they're going to do next. So I'm just going to put 3 days here. So this is a section 2. If you ever have questions about what does it mean to have the right to cure, what happens during the right to cure process, 99.9% of your answers are already right there in the document. You just need to familiarize yourself with the language so it gives you greater confidence in knowing what possible scenarios might exist. So we also know that our seller or our buyer wants to have a radon test. And nowadays, many home inspectors can also do a radon test at the same time as the home inspection. They would leave a radon kit in the basement. It has to stay there for, I believe, 24 or 48 hours. The home inspector would go back to pick it up to see what the radon levels are like. But typically the radon testing contingency follows the same time frame as the home inspection. So above here, we had given ourselves 10 days to have this figured out. I'm going to do 10 days too for the radon test. And then up on the top of page 5, who has the right to cure? So a similar section here as we just saw in the home inspection contingency. In the seller's market, it's very common for buyers to give the seller the right to cure the radon contingency. And how that gets cured is a seller would install a radon mitigation system. Or perhaps maybe even a seller might offer a credit for the amount of a radon mitigation system, which is around $1,500. And then the buyer is responsible for putting that in after closing. Whatever you decide to do has to be outlined in an amendment that is signed by both parties that details those specifics. Now, the offer is going to be null and void if the buyer delivers a written notice and a report to the seller and the seller doesn't have the right to cure. Or this offer is null and void if the buyer delivers a notice to the seller and the seller has the right to cure, but they decide they don't want to cure it. So then it's really up to the buyer as to whether or not they want to proceed or not. Okay, I'm going to go into the financing section. So I'm going to open up my Carl's mortgage calculator, or you can open up whatever mortgage calculator you like the most. But we know that our folks are going to be getting a conventional loan. So I'm checking the box that yes, this offers contingent on financing. And in line 249, you indicate the type of loan that the buyer is getting. So it might be an FHA, a VA, a 30-year conventional, a 15-year conventional. You always put the name type here. And this is in line 250. This is going to be the number of days that we are going to be indicating that we will submit a loan commitment letter. So that would satisfy, that would mean that we've got the loan. How many days are we going to give ourselves to get this done? If we're closing in about 30 so days, that's a rather fast but achievable time frame. This is where now I would pick up the phone and call the buyer's lender and just confirm a few things with them, because the last thing you want to do is put a deadline in place that maybe the lender feels that they might not be able to achieve time-wise. So say we called up our buyer's lender and we said, we want to close in 30 days. Do you think we could get the financing contingency completed, signed, sealed, delivered within 21 days? And they might say, yes, that's fine. Or they might say, no, we kind of need like 25 days. So consult your lender accordingly just to see what is realistic and what is achievable. So I'm going to put here, we're going to get it done in 21 days. Then we need to start talking about, well, how much is the loan that the buyer is going to be getting? What's the amount of money that the buyer is actually getting a loan for? So that's what we put here in line 251, that we enter in what the principal amount of the loan is. So we know, if I'm in my mortgage calculator now, that we're offering $549,900. And we know that our buyers are putting 20% down. That leaves us with a down payment of $109,980,000. That's how much they have to bring to closing for the down payment, but then their principal is $439,920. And the principal amount is what you put in line 251. So I've got 20% of $549,900, a 20% down payment is $109,980. I take the purchase price minus the down payment to get me my principal or my loan amount, and I've got 439,920. If anybody's following along and putting that in a calculator, is that something similar to what you got? Nope. Yes, yes. Okay, perfect. Now, here in line 251, we also have to talk about how long is the loan for and how is it going to be amortized. So we've got a 30-year loan here, so it's going to be a term of not less than 30 years, and our payments are going to be amortized over 30 years. If it was a 15-year loan, it would be 15 years and 15 years. If it was a VA loan, it's still probably 30 and 30. So if you ever have any questions about this section and what to put in this section from a financing perspective, by all means, lenders would rather have you call them and ask versus put something here in the offer that might be incorrect. For our offer practice, we're going to say that interest rates are 7%. Right now, they're actually lower than that. They're like maybe 6.5%, but sometimes I like to be a little bit more conservative with my interest rates and my offers. So if we are going to do a down payment of 20% at an interest rate of 7%, that means that our monthly payments, our loan, our mortgage is going to be $2,926.80. So again, initial monthly payments of principal and interest shall not exceed $2,926.80. Does everybody get that? Did you guys get that if you use 7% for your interest rate? Cool. Okay. So one thing to always keep in mind and to point out to your buyer, some buyers might see this amount and think, oh, that's a lot less than what I was budgeting for. This is great. All of this, the only thing that this dollar amount represents is their monthly mortgage payment, the principal plus interest. It doesn't include taxes or home insurance or maybe PMI insurance. So the next sentence in the offer states the buyer acknowledges that the lender's required monthly payments may also include 1/12 of the estimated net annual taxes, hazard insurance premiums, and PMI insurance. So again, it's just reiterating, your buyer might be paying more every month. This just indicates how much their actual loan, the principal plus monthly interest is. Buyer agrees to pay discount points in an amount not to exceed blank. We're not buying our points, or we're not buying the interest rate down, so this is going to stay 0. And then in lines 264 and 265, we have to indicate what type of financing they're getting. So we're getting a 30-year loan, which means the interest rate that we are going to be charged is going to be at a fixed rate or the same rate over the duration of the 30 years. So we're going to check fixed rate financing. And today we said the interest rate shall not exceed 7%. If your buyer was getting an ARM or an adjustable rate mortgage, you would be checking that box instead. And there's things that you need to make sure that you understand what the starting point is, how many years the interest rate will be fixed at for that amount, then how does it increase? So this is a section that if your client is getting an ARM, pick up the phone and call the lender just to confirm how you should be accurately filling in this information. I'm going to quickly just go down to the bottom of this page, line 288, seller financing. So our folks are getting a loan, so we're not going to be working with the seller who would be financing the transaction with us. So I'm going to put NA, and again, it's best practice. If a section of the offer is not going to be included in the offer, don't leave the box blank. Check the box as NA. At the top of page 6, if this was a cash offer, this is where we would be using this section. So if the offer isn't contingent on financing, within blank days after acceptance, the buyer shall deliver to the seller either a written verification from a financial institution or third party that the buyer has funds at the time of the offer. So this is where you would talk about how many days you would be providing a proof of funds, but we don't have to worry about that in this offer because we are getting a finance. This is getting financed. And because we are getting it financed, the lender will have an appraisal done on the property. The lender wants to know exactly how much the home is worth, and the appraiser will be telling them such. So why we check this box though, isn't just indicating, hey, our buyer needs to have an appraisal. Checking this box gives us the opportunity to potentially negotiate with the other party if that appraised value comes in lower than what you offered, your buyer's offered. So let's read this section. The offer is contingent upon the buyer or the buyer's lender having the property appraised at the buyer's expense. That's also important for you to make sure that you tell your buyer that they will have to pay for the appraisal most of the time. And it's going to be by a Wisconsin licensed or certified independent appraiser who issues an appraisal report dated subsequent to the date stated on line 1. So the appraisal has to be done after today's date, which today's date is what the offer is from, indicating the appraised value for the property is equal to or greater than the agreed upon purchase price. Okay. So this contingency shall be deemed satisfied unless the buyer within blank days after acceptance delivers to a seller a copy of the appraisal report indicating an appraised value is less than the agreed upon purchase price and a written notice objection to the appraised value. So let's do a little scenario here. We are offering $549,900. Say an appraiser comes in and indicates the home's appraised value. The appraiser thinks it's worth $540,000. So we've got a little bit of a difference to make up, right? In that situation where you have an appraised value that is lower than the offer amount, the buyer's agent can provide a copy of the appraisal report to the listing agent indicating such. Here's the appraisal came in low. And this is where we start to negotiate if that's something that you're writing into your offer. Now, let's just say on the flip side, say we offered $549,900 and maybe the appraiser came in and said, you know what, the house is worth $555,000. In that instance, you don't give the appraisal report to the listing agent. All you have to do is you can send a notice indicating that the appraised value is good. Buyer hereby satisfies appraisal contingency and you move on. You could also just send an email indicating buyer value looks good on the appraisal. We move on. It is only when the appraised value comes in lower than the offer amount that you give a copy of the appraisal report to the listing agent. So let's go back to our example then. So we've offered $549,900. The appraiser comes in and says it's only worth $540,000. So when you give the seller the right to cure, and in a seller's market, it is very common for buyers to give the seller the right to cure the appraisal. When you give the seller the right to cure, the seller can satisfy the contingency by delivering written notice to the buyer, adjusting the purchase price to the value shown on the appraisal report. So this is where you start negotiating. So if our value is at $540,000, I'm picking up the phone and I'm calling the listing agent. And I will say, hello, Ross, we got the appraisal back. The appraisal came in short. It came in at $540,000. I'm going to be talking with my buyers about next steps, but this is something that I just want to make sure that you're aware of, and you should inform your seller accordingly. Now, this is where you might have the opportunity to negotiate. Mr. Seller, we're $10,000 off or $9,900 off. The buyers would like to see if you would be willing to drop the purchase price to meet the appraised value of $540,000. Or maybe you say, you know what, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, my buyer has $5,000 that they can use to cover the gap. Can you cover the remainder? And you would have to adjust the purchase price. The key thing here is if both parties agree to adjusting the purchase price, you have to make sure that you execute an amendment, right? That solely reflects the adjusted purchase price. An amendment means both parties agree and sign to the terms that are included in the amendment. Now, say we can't come to an agreement on reducing the purchase price. So the offer is null and void if the buyer makes timely delivery of the notice objecting to the appraised value and the written appraisal report, and the seller does not have the right to cure, or the seller has the right to cure, but they're delivering notice that they're not going to adjust the purchase price, or the seller doesn't timely deliver the written notice. What can happen here is if you don't come to an agreement to adjust the purchase price via an amendment, and you let the contingency deadline expire, you have just waived any rights for your buyer to negotiate that price down, and your buyer is now purchasing the home at the original asking price, and your buyer will have to come to closing with the cash to make up the difference. So you want to make sure you know your dates and deadlines, because there are some deadlines that if you expire and if you don't have any written amendment in place indicating what's going to happen next, it might be on your buyer to have to fund the money. Oh, I see there was a question here. How often have you seen seller financing in a transaction? I personally have never seen it, Rebecca. It's not terribly common right now in this market, but seller financing might be a situation where the sellers are grandparents and maybe they're offering, or the grandchildren are going to be purchasing the home and the grandparents are going to give the grandchildren a loan or something like that. But yeah, we don't see it terribly often right now. Okay, moving on, because we've got 8 minutes. We can do it. Box 328, closing of the buyer's property. So this is called the home sale contingency. So if your buyers had a house and the only way they could buy a new house is if they sell their old house, you would check this box indicating the offer is contingent upon the closing of the sale at the buyer's property located at, and you would put the buyer's current address, and you would indicate when that house is going to close. But we're not including a home sale contingency in this offer. Maybe we'll do that next week. So I'm going to put NA. And a bump clause typically accompanies a home sale contingency. So we're not going to put anything in here. A secondary offer. So you would know if the seller is accepting secondary offers. And a secondary offer means the seller has already accepted an offer. That offer is in the primary position. However, maybe the seller thinks that that primary offer, maybe the transaction is starting to head south and it doesn't look like it's going to close. Maybe a seller would be willing to accept secondary offers or like backup offers. So in the event that that first offer falls through, they've got another one ready to go. You would know if you were writing as a secondary offer. The listing agent should be telling you such. So for our practice today, we're going to put NA. And then moving down into prorations, you have to check one of the boxes in terms of how taxes, assessments, maybe some municipal charges, how are those going to get prorated or split between the buyer and the seller? And the majority of times people check box 366, which indicates that the taxes from the preceding year, so 2023, that's the amount that we're going to use to help us identify how to prorate taxes. And the title company will prorate those charges. And you will see those prorations on the closing disclosure on the closing statement. Make sure you just familiarize yourself though with some of these other options. If it's a new construction and the land was previously taxed as land, there is going to be a significant change in the tax amount between just vacant land and now land with a home on it. So familiarize yourself with these. If you have questions, by all means, call the helpline. You can call me, you can call Joan or Steph. I'm gonna go down into page 8. This is not a leased property, or there isn't a lease currently on the property, or it's not being used as an investment property or rental, so we don't have to put anything there. And I'm really zipping through this. Please make sure you really read through some of these things as they are important to your buyer, like how a final walkthrough goes, how the house needs to be maintained by the seller. So make sure you review this. And then also too, in lines 510 to 512, you should always indicate that if your buyers are interested in researching the sex offender registry, you have to direct them to this website. You cannot do that for them. Just give them the resources. They need to do the research on their own. The bottom of page 9 talks about FIRPTA, the Foreign Investment in Real Property Tax Act. So just make sure you familiarize yourself with this. But this is something that the title company helps us determine whether or not the seller is a citizen or if they are not a citizen. And there's reasons why that's important to know. And then here's the new section here in the offer, talking about the seller payment of compensation to the buyer's firm. So if you remember at the beginning of practice, I said that I had called the listing agent, and in MLS, the listing indicated that the seller was offering concessions. The listing agent said, yes, the seller's offering concessions and they're willing to offer 2.4% in concessions. And I asked the listing agent, how would you like that in the offer? Would you like it actually in the offer to purchase or as a seller credit and addendum A? And the listing agent said in the offer itself. So we're going to check this box. And this indicates that the seller is now agreeing to pay the buyer's firm. So this goes, the relationship now for compensation to you, the buyer's agent, is between the seller and the buyer's firm. So we're going to put 2.4% of purchase price. If you have questions about whether or not this needs to be filled in, there's a lot of contract trainings from the past, I think 3 Mondays that really go into various scenarios and talks about this. But if you're not sure, call the helpline. You can call Joan or Steph, you can call myself, but also just have open lines of communication too with the listing agent. But there might be times when you don't hear back from the listing agent. And again, if you have questions, call for help. You don't have to figure this out by yourself. So additional provisions and contingencies, this is boilerplate information here. Abbas, this might be lines where you would put buyer or seller did not provide condition report, or buyer acknowledges the refusal to complete form was submitted on a blank date. You could put that here if you wanted. Then at the bottom, we're putting in how we're going to be delivering information, and you can do it personally. So actually giving documents in person, and the seller's recipient would be the listing agent, which is Ross Treffert. I'm just going to put his. And then the buyers is you. And then we're not going to send things via fax. We're not going to send things commercially. We're not going to send things through the mail, but we are going to send things via email. And the seller's email address is the listing agent. And the email address for the buyer is yours. Okay. And then make sure you indicate what addenda you're including, and I'll defer to you guys as to how you want to, if you're going to include addendum AC with an inspection coverage or an appraisal gap, but you would just write GMAR addendum A, Addendum S is lead paint, addendum AC if applicable. And then make sure you put your name and your firm. So I know that was quick. I will send this information out to everyone, but I strongly encourage you to take the time to continue filling out the offer documents and then send to me by tomorrow at 9 a.m. And I will take a look at them and give you guys feedback. Any immediate questions? Nope. Okay, cool. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining. See you soon.